Hey everybody, KC here. So today's morning newsbeat conversation is with Yael Cosset, who is the CIO at Kroger. Really interesting conversation. I've never met Yael before, so I was really happy that he found some time to talk to the morning newsbeat audience. And I learned a lot in this conversation. One of the things that I thought was really interesting was that, you know, I've always characterized Kroger as taking big swings, right? Big swings in terms of some of the things it's doing with Ocado, its warehouses, and a lot of the strategies that it's put in place. And one of the things he educates me about in this thing is, he says, we're taking big swings, but we're also taking a lot of small swings. And he said the big swings get a lot of attention, and we tell that story probably better than we tell the small swing story. So I thought he was really interesting, fascinating conversation, I thought, and I hope you enjoy this chat with Yael Cosset, the CIO at Kroger. Yael Cosset, thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it. Welcome to Morning Newsbeat.
Thanks for having me, Kevin.
Oh, my pleasure. So I'm curious, you know, everybody talks about how the degree to which e-commerce sort of accelerated in the grocery industry during the pandemic, you know, getting us 3 or 4 or 5 years ahead of where people thought we'd be right now. Were there any surprises in there for you, other than the fact that who would have thought we would have gotten there so fast? But in terms of the directional nature, what became popular, what maybe didn't become popular, were there any surprises there for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I would separate the popular and the kind of the relevant and what's going to be here to stay. I mean, you've heard, I'm sure, many of the stories, you know, as our consumers went into kind of a little bit of a panic during the early stage of the pandemic and really went down the hoarding path. We saw massive spikes in purchasing of, the toilet paper, which was highly publicized, but, water, pasta, some of it is like basic commodities. Yep. As restaurants shut down, you started to see some trends around ingredients that reflected the fact that consumers were spending more time at home cooking, enjoying cooking. So like things that spices, flour, shrimps, like saw double-digit ingredients, you would definitely associate with more of a cooking experience. So I would say you saw big spikes, double-digit, triple-digit growth in some of these commodities, and then it stabilized. If I look at what happened last year and what has clearly been a new trend and maybe accelerated some of the transformation, so more relevant transition, no doubt, in my opinion, the acceleration of the consumer behavior evolution toward engaging digitally, whether it's transacting e-commerce or just interacting with us digitally, that was the biggest change. And not surprised necessarily, pleased, but surprised with how much of that has persisted post-pandemic and how that's a new way of engaging.
It had to be in your planning, obviously, pre-pandemic, in terms of things like going into Florida with what is essentially a pure play e-grocery model, now coming to the Northeast. Can't wait to see what you do, because we could use Kroger around here. But I would imagine that at some level, the degree to which there was so much acceleration had to give you even greater confidence about those decisions going forward, saying, this is something that it's less of a roll of the dice perhaps now than it would have seemed 2 years ago.
Yeah, I think you said it very well. I think the plans were there. We had been investing in building what we've referred to as kind of a seamless experience platform. So what you would expect in terms of technology, infrastructure, and digital capabilities to really engage with our customers. And we had, very aggressive growth plan to really meet the customer there over the course of several years. And, with the pandemic, all of that was off. It was no longer a 2 or 3 year transition plan. It became like a 3 to 6 months activation, in some cases, matter of days. We had, at the beginning, back in March, April 2020, we saw spikes of engagement digitally go from grow year on year, like by 800, 900%, which, obviously, if you were prepared, and we were prepared with the right infrastructure, great. but you need to operate at a different level. So in that process, we still learn to operate differently, execute differently, and break things to really accelerate that transition. But yeah, it was definitely for the industry and us in particular an acceleration of by 3 or 4 years of the journey we were on initially.
It's interesting. You were talking before about the run on things like toilet paper and paper towels, and then there were ingredients because people were changing their not just their consumption behavior, but they were eating at home as opposed to eating out. And the word that got used a lot in there was the word essential. People were talking about not just essential in terms of what they were buying, but that supermarkets were being seen as being more essential to people than they were before. Do you guys, or do you think differently about that word essential now? It's funny, people don't use it as much as I would have, as they were 18 months ago. And to me, it just feels like this word that ought to be at the core of every decision that retailers are making.
I mean, I would say the transformation of the shopping, the retailing model is undeniable. And I would say absolutely, if to be relevant long-term with our customers, you have to have now some capability, some platform to engage digitally with them. And I would say in that sense, this is becoming table stake. These are non-negotiable. Having that capability is an essential commodity, and having that muscle, that ability to engage with our customers digitally. I mean, you look at the expansion of across the entire spectrum, pickup, delivery, ship to home, massive acceleration, but also even in the pickup and delivery model, what would have been I would like to get it in a few hours or in a day, it's like it's measured now in terms of minutes. So it's definitely the evolution of the grocery industry, food industry, and how customers shop has kind of redefined the role we play in our communities.
Yeah, it's interesting. Tell me if you agree with this or not. It's something I've been writing a lot about on Morning Newsbeat. Is one of the reasons that retailers were able to innovate so quickly during the pandemic was because they weren't thinking about innovation. That a lot of retailers, and I'm not including Kroger in this, but a lot of retailers, when they say, "Oh, we're going to innovate," and then they have a focus group, and then they have a committee, and then they go back to the right, and it takes forever to kind of roll things out. And that in this case, they were innovating quickly, but they weren't thinking about it as being innovation. They were thinking about it as being survival, right? It's what they had to do to stay alive tomorrow. Does that, I guess, first of all, would you agree with that assessment, number one? And number two, does that mean that retailers, and you can apply this to Kroger to whatever degree you want to, you need to think differently about the process of innovation in terms of being able to move quicker than maybe you would have in the past?
Yeah, I don't know. On the survival, I think it's really a matter of like what retailer in particular you look at. I think we had made a significant investment to be prepared for some of that transformation, kind of what you were asking earlier, maybe a little bit earlier than some of that disruption or transformation happened a little earlier than we had expected in terms of consumer behavior. I think the key, though, if I were to take a step back, it is becoming less about the size of the leap forward and more about the speed of that leap forward, if that makes sense. So when I think about innovation today, 5 years ago, innovating would have been, big, long programs, big technology investment, big technology innovation or invention on a schedule that was, reasonably fast but manageable. I think what the pandemic taught us, and what I believe is going to be a critical muscle moving forward, is that concept of velocity. Innovation is more about the speed, the pace at which we are managing the disruption, that transformation, and a little bit less about how big that step forward is. And we see it, across our portfolio of technology and digital capabilities. The speed of adjustment to really meet the customer, meet our associates as well, with capabilities that allows them to operate differently, is what is mattering the most.
So that's really interesting, because if you'll permit me to use a baseball metaphor, right? There are some teams that like to hit home runs, And then there are some teams that, no, I'm going to hit single after single after single, maybe a double. We're going to keep guys on the bases. They're constantly moving, and it's the speed of the game that they're going for. And so what you're saying is, if I'm getting the metaphor right, is that it's better to play that kind of baseball where you're constantly moving base to base to base to base to base than wait for the big home run. Is that a fair metaphor?
Yeah, I'm not the baseball expert.
Okay. That's all right.
Other sports maybe, but baseball is not my expertise. But I would say it's almost you're playing a baseball game in 2 innings.
Right.
Which means the strategic choices you make and the impact they have on the outcome of the game have to be a lot more contracted or concentrated, which means you need to run 2 parallel tracks. Is the long-term innovation that will manage massive disruption and transformation in a company, while in parallel truly understanding what matters to the customers, or in our case customers and associates, on a day-to-day basis. And in the past, it would have been very much focused on long view, forward-looking, disruptive innovation. And today, it's like, I would say it's probably like 70% is like a lot of that high velocity, constant transformation and disruption. If we talked about digital and e-commerce earlier, pickup, delivery is not a new concept. Right. It's been, in place in the US and abroad in Europe and in Asia for decades. But the way it shows up, the way it manifests itself today for the consumer in the US has changed half a dozen times in the past 12 months. So it's not inventing a new modality, a new way of transacting with customers with click and collect or delivery. It's really about evolving within that concept. So pickup would have been, or delivery would have been, a long-term forward-thinking innovation. Within that long term, like, what are the iterative steps we can take to be more and more relevant to the consumer? Back to my example of, like, there's different expectation, different shopping trip. Some are hyper convenience, high immediacy expectation, maybe a shorter set of products, versus like the niche items, where people are about to cook and shop for Thanksgiving. They have high expectation on specific items that can have a longer burn in terms of when you get it to me as a consumer.
Yeah. It's interesting because you make me think that I need to, because sometimes when I write about Kroger, I write about Kroger taking big swings. I think I've used that phrase a number of times, as compared to other companies that sometimes are, because of your CFC, Ocado, all those kinds of things you're doing. And that some companies are taking smaller swings with, their micro-fulfillment centers and just doing things on a smaller basis. And it sounds like I need to rethink the way I express that, only in the sense that, yes, you're taking big swings on this track, but on this track, you're also making lots of the small, you're revolutionizing on one track and you're evolutionizing, if that's a word, on the other track. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because your reaction is like, oh, I need to think differently about how I talk about Kroger. It's making me realize, take a note, like, that we need to change how we speak about our innovation and the journey we're on. We tend to, what makes it into the media is typically the big swings, to right. Your point earlier, to your analogy, the home runs, the right. very high visible, disruptive steps that we take, not necessarily so much, a lot of the incremental investment that are evolving the experience in a very differentiated way.
I'm curious, since we're doing this for Morning News Beat's 20th anniversary, where were you 20 years ago? And how is the way you've thought about innovation changed?
I think we've touched on a lot of his themes. 20 years ago, you would have found me helping companies in retail, in the financial services and insurance, telco, helping them make sense of how to utilize their data asset to evolve their business model, transform their business model. The big thing I would say back then versus today, and probably 20 years from now, when we have the 40-year anniversary discussion, is what would have been like. What would have been? I probably will have more white hair and or maybe even no hair left anymore.
I'll be 87, so that's like.
Here we go. So I don't know. We'll see where we will be in 20 years, but the way I think, like 20 years ago, it was big technology investment, big investment in data infrastructure. It was really more about the what you're doing, what you're innovating on. And these were a long transformation program, 18, 24 months program with like big change management on how to educate a retailer, how to take advantage of data to better understand their business. Nowadays, innovation is less about what you're actually building, not, it's commodity, technology infrastructure, data infrastructure. The innovation is not there. It's really how quickly can you harness that value, whether it's to make the customer experience more relevant. We have last year we did over $500 billion digital personalized offers to customers. 95% of the touch point are personalized. So what is it next year? And this needs to evolve very, very rapidly because the customer engages differently.
Well, that's interesting, because if the basic premise is that everybody is sort of to some degree working off the same platform, right? The same technologies are available to most people, although that's not entirely true, because you have access to stuff that a three-store chain, independent wouldn't have access to.
That's fair.
At least, but or in your case, it would be proprietary, and they may be they're outsourcing it. But if everybody has access to basically the same platform, it is less what you have access to and more how you think about it and what you do with it than it is in terms of the technology. It's more software than hardware in some ways.
Yeah, it's the choice you make, right? Let's pretend theoretically that technology and data capabilities, digital capabilities is universally available. It certainly is more accessible today than it was 20 years ago. It costs less. You have more talent around us to really, drive the adoption and the implementation of that technology. So it's really more about, what do you stand for? What do we stand for, Kroger, for our customers? Seamless customer experience, seamless associate experience, where we make it as easy for an associate to perform their task as it is for a customer to shop with us. So your strategic choices then dictate what you focus on. You can't do everything, right? That's a little bit of the challenge when you live in technology, is the risk of getting distracted by all these opportunities to innovate. It's always attractive, but like in the big picture, does it really matter to the customer? So that's the tough choice, retailers and the industry in general have to make. What do you focus on? What matters the most to your customers?
Yeah. Is there something that has not taken off? And again, you can be specific to Kroger or universal in how you answer the question. Is there something over the last 2 years or so in terms of technology or that you would have expected would have gotten more traction than it has, that maybe you would have said, oh, consumers are going to think this is just fantastic, and consumers sort of went, no, not so much?
It ties a little bit to what you were just saying about less about the pure technology or technical nature of the innovation, but more the model. I would say customers' expectations and for transparency and better understanding what they ingest, what they eat, how it fits in their preferences, whether it's budget prioritization, health prioritization, is as high as that's ever been. And the pandemic even accelerated that expectation. I want to know what I get, how it's impacting me. And I look at the broad experience in the industry, specifically in the US. I think it's a little bit further, in front of us in Asia or in Europe. We basically underutilize data and technology to surface that information, make you, Kevin, knowledgeable about where the food comes from. So end-to-end traceability. This is not innovation. This is here today. Like, we have the ability to track an item from the moment it gets harvested to your mouth. How do we, surface that technology, that information, that knowledge more easily and fit your objective? It could be budget, it could be sustainability, it could be health priorities. You want to have the freshest tomato or berry. So how do I tell you when to consume it? I think that would be a little bit of a disappointment. We haven't really, as an industry, we haven't really harnessed that asset, and especially as health become an even more critical priority for our consumer, that's a huge opportunity to accelerate innovation in that space.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I can remember many, many years ago, and it's maybe longer than 20 years ago, I was in Japan, and they were showing me technology there where there was a code that, like, they'd have a pre-wrapped package of tomatoes, right? And on the package there was a code, and it was not a QR code. They hadn't invented them yet, or at least they weren't popular. And you could use your phone. And in this case, it wasn't a smartphone because they didn't exist yet either. It was sort of a dumb phone, but you could take a picture of it and it would instantly allow you to find out where the tomatoes were grown, what was used to fertilize you could see a picture of the farmer who grew the tomatoes. And I can remember asking the retailer to say, well, how many people use this? And he said to me, oh, about, 5-10% of our customers. And I said, oh my God, I can't believe only 5 or 10% of your customers use this, and you've obviously invested a lot in it. And he said, oh no, Kevin, you don't understand. It's here for the 90% of customers who feel they don't have to, because they feel that because we're providing the information, they can trust us.
Yeah. It's almost like a stamp of approval.
Right.
It's like, I may not look at it, but as long as it says, if I want it, I can look at the information and make sure it's safe product. And you spot on, I think a lot of retailers in Asia and manufacturers in Asia and in Europe, for good and bad reason, have maybe done a little bit more in that space. I think if I were to, snap my finger and you and I discussed, maybe not 20 years, but 5 years from now where we are, I think there will be a big transformation in the retail space. Complete traceability, complete transparency on ingredients, where it's sourcing, where it's being sourced from, how it got to me, and freshness and health impact, big priorities. I think we'll see more of that innovation in the coming years. The underlying technology is here. So it's really a function of bringing it to life for the consumers.
What do you make of all this metaverse talk? I mean, Google, Facebook is making this big metaverse commitment. Everybody's talking about it. I got to be honest, I don't completely understand it. So you're a lot smarter about this stuff than I am. When you read about the metaverse, what do you make of it? And is there a retail play in there somewhere where it'll change the way people think about retail or shopping?
Yeah, I definitely don't think I'm any smarter on the topic. I would say maybe you can call me idealistic or optimistic, or maybe I have a personal bias. I think the way people shop and in general interact will continue to lean further and further into virtualization, alternative worlds, and so forth. I don't think consuming food will be virtualized. I think it's in us, and I hope it stays that way. I hope people forever want to leverage the metaverse application, if you will, to retail, to make it simpler to access the product, the solutions I want, to simplify, curate my experience, create an immersive virtual experience. That's probably the easiest way to scale personal retail. But I still believe, and if you ask me to vote, I would vote like, please do not virtualize the food experience. It needs to be physically enjoyed, appreciated. The stinky cheese, the crusty bread, the fresh tomatoes you can smell, the warm, buttery, crust, like all of that can't go away. And I think if there was a virtualization of the world we live in, it will be more on that level of the interaction, not on the food consumption. I certainly hope so. That would be a very big step back for all of us.
Yeah, it's interesting. All the things you just described are all part of the fresh experience in the store, right? But it's the CPG products, the cornflakes, the Oreos, the Tide, whatever. Those are the things where it doesn't matter as much, right? That shopping experience can be virtualized, if that's a word, and used to supplement what is the great fresh experience, which is the thing that really good supermarkets do best.
Absolutely, you're right. And back to the opportunity to better leverage data and technology to surface the information that matters to the customer. I don't think we're far away from a world where the ingredients and the micronutrients are optimized or developed and tailored to your specific needs, whether it's a physical condition, a or health objective that we may have. I think micronutrients optimization in your cereal. I don't know how easy it is at scale, but like I think that virtualization and that personalized version of your ingredients will come. But I think in the end, I hope, like I said, that we don't compromise on the true food experience that we ingest.
Yeah. So one last question, which is I'm curious, during the pandemic, when everybody was home and nobody was going to the movies, right? Nobody was doing that sort of thing. I'm curious, was there a TV show or movie that you just streamed and you got addicted to that resonated with you in some way that you say, oh man, that was part of my pandemic experience?
The bulk of the year last year was a little bit of a blur, even going into 2021. And I think the intensity of the call it the biggest part of 2020, the tension, the social tension. I mean, like it was a pretty heavy year all around. So kind of the escape, probably the one that comes to mind. I probably watched bad stuff as well. That's time I'll never get back. But I would say the one that would come to mind is, I didn't have a lot of time with the family. So the few opportunities to escape some of the crazy world and the brutality of the pandemic environment. I watched The Mandalorian with my son, and that was kind of an escape back to metaverse, like my virtual of escape. And the irony of this is we spent a lot of time in technology thinking about like what's the next normal, or what's the new normal, what's the post-pandemic normal. And we ended up realizing very quickly throughout last year, like actually there isn't a next normal. We're already in it. The pandemic kind of like has cycles, but we're in a new world. We're in a new environment where velocity, speed is what matters. Focus on the customer is what matters. So we've caught, and maybe corrupted by the viewing of Mandalorian, we've caught ourselves saying like, this is the way, quite frequently referring to the Mandalorian often, but that would be the one. I don't know, what was yours?
Mandalorian was certainly one of them. I found myself even now I've watched way too much stuff. I will tell you. Lately, I'm totally hooked on Dope Sick, which is the OxyContin TV series on Hulu. But I think Mandalorian is a really interesting example because in so many ways the Mandalorian's episodes were better than a lot of the recent Star Wars movies. And I think, and to me, it's reflective of the idea that yes, we lost the experience of going to a movie theater with a couple of hundred people, but the entertainment experience was as good. And by the way, you could hit pause and go to the bathroom or go get something to drink. And to me, that is a great metaphor for how consumers are also going to, it's the same, I think, the same impulses that will lead people to say, no, I'm perfectly happy to watch a movie at home or a TV series at home than go to the movies, is the same impulse that's going to have people saying, listen, for the items where it doesn't make a difference, I don't need to go to the store. I'll go to the store when it matters, and where it does make a difference, but I don't need to go to the store. And I think the impulses are the same. And so I think retailers should learn a lot from people like you who said, no, I can stay home and watch The Mandalorian. I think it's the same, the same thinking.
I love it. I'm gonna use it, Kevin. It's a great analogy. How we access the experience is evolving and is taking advantage of great innovation. The actual experience, the quality, the expectation of what we consume continues to be the same. I mean, obviously, back to the food point, we've got to increase the appreciation. You, me, your family, our neighbors. We are consuming more food at home and actually appreciating that food experience as a group, as a family, more so than 2 or 5 years ago. And the way we access it, as in the shopping, the browsing, the inspiration has also evolved. But in the end, a good dinner with friends, good company, good food can't replace it.
Yeah, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate your time, and I really I thank you for being part of the Morning Newsbeat 20th anniversary experience, whatever that is. I can't guarantee I'm going to be around for another 20, but I'll do my best.
I'll track you down in 20 years. We can, look back on how much of our discussion was right.
Sounds great. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it. Take care.
Take care, Kevin. Thank you.